Do you remember what Saturday mornings used to feel like? Not the kind where you sleep in or scroll your phone. I mean the kind where the world stopped for a few magical hours, and the TV belonged to you. Back then, in the 1970s, you didn't watch cartoons, you lived them. The smell of cereal hit the air, sunlight leaked through the curtains, and the jingle of the TV theme song felt like a personal invitation to happiness. Those mornings were sacred. They were your weekly reset button. And today, we're going back to those 20 unforgettable shows that shaped your Saturdays, the ones every kid from the 70s still remembers. Let's start where so many of those mornings began. Scooby-Doo, where are you? You could almost hear the laugh track before it started, that goofy, echoing chuckle that told you something spooky and funny was about to unfold. Scooby-Doo, where are you? Wasn't just a cartoon, it was a ritual. The mystery machine rolling into another foggy town, Velma's glasses slipping, Shaggy's voice cracking in fear. It all felt like home. You can still see it, can't you? The grainy animation, the exaggerated colors, the strange way everyone ran in place before moving. The ghosts were never ghosts, and yet as a kid, you still believed, at least until the unmasking. Hanna-Barbera had this formula down to a science. 5 kids, a dog, and a problem that always turned out to be a guy in a rubber mask. What made Scooby-Doo magical wasn't the mystery, it was the rhythm. Every episode had that perfect mix of fear and laughter, like holding your breath on a roller coaster. And now, kids solve mysteries on iPads before breakfast. But you waited all week for that one moment when Shaggy screamed, "Zoinks!" Tell me honestly, didn't you secretly want a Great Dane that could talk? The Bugs Bunny Dodge Roadrunner Show. The second that familiar Looney Tunes fanfare hit, you knew you were in safe hands. The Bugs Bunny High Roadrunner show was pure chaotic brilliance. You didn't just laugh, you cackled. Wile E. Coyote with his ACME gadgets, Daffy's tantrums, Bugs casually outsmarting everyone. That was your education in timing and wit. You can almost smell the toast and hear the clatter of the kitchen while you sat cross-legged on the floor. The screen was alive with impossible physics. Anvils dropped, dynamite exploded, and somehow everyone survived to do it again next week. These weren't just gags, they were an introduction to irony, slapstick, and consequence-free rebellion. Warner Brothers taught kids that cleverness always beats brute force, and sarcasm could be an art form. Compare that to today's digital noise, where humor scrolls past before it lands. Back then, a single eyebrow raise from Bugs was worth a dozen punchlines. Be honest, how many times did you try to do that little "What's up, Doc?" in the mirror? Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids. Now this one had a different energy. Fat Albert didn't just entertain, it taught. That funky theme song kicked in with the Junkyard Band playing on makeshift instruments, and right away, you knew you were about to learn something real. Hey, 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 still rings in your head, doesn't it? The colors were warm and gritty, like the neighborhood itself. These weren't polished superheroes or space travelers. They were kids like you, navigating friendship, teasing, mistakes, and lessons that hit deeper than most adults' shows. The animation was clunky, the pacing slow, but it carried heart. Each episode slipped in a moral. Sometimes gentle, sometimes heavy, about honesty, empathy, or doing the right thing when it wasn't easy. Saturday mornings weren't just about escaping, they were about growing up without realizing it. Look at kids now, all screens, no slow lessons, but back then, a cartoon made you feel something. You laughed, you learned, and maybe you walked a little taller after. Do you remember which lesson stuck with you the most? The Pink Panther Show. If Fat Albert was a teacher, the Pink Panther Show was pure style. That silky, jazzy Henry Mancini theme didn't just play, it slid into your ears. The first notes alone could make you smile before anything even happened. What made it special was the silence. The Pink Panther barely spoke, yet you always knew what he was thinking. Sly, elegant, just a little too clever for the rest of the world. His world was a pastel dreamscape of slapstick elegance, where every sound, a creak, a horn, a sigh, told the story. Saturday mornings often bounced from noise to noise, but when this came on, you leaned in. You watched. The humor was visual poetry, smooth, rhythmic, like a mime wrapped in jazz. It's funny to think how much emotion they packed into wordless animation. Compare that to today's constant chatter. Sometimes silence really was the loudest laugh. Be honest, didn't you try to walk like him once? That slow, cool strut across the living room carpet. Josie and the Pussycats. And then there were the cool girls, the ones who showed up in glittery cat ears, guitars slung low, solving mysteries between concerts. Josie and the Pussycats was pure candy for the ears and eyes. You remember the music, bubblegum rock mixed with a touch of rebellion. Every episode blended fashion, adventure, and friendship in a way that made it feel like a pop concert wrapped inside a cartoon. Josie, Valerie, and Melody weren't just animated, they were icons of independence, fun, and unity. The animation had that signature Hanna-Barbera charm, recycled backgrounds, slightly off lip syncs, but the energy carried it. It was the 1970s dream distilled. Girl power, travel, and catchy hooks that stuck in your head for days. Today, cartoons are laser cut and algorithm tested, but Josie and her crew were handmade, messy, musical, human. You didn't just watch, you sang along. Tell me, can you still hum that theme song without smiling? That's just the beginning, because Saturday mornings in the 1970s weren't just a few hours of cartoons, they were a cultural heartbeat, and we've only cracked open the first 5 shows. Next, we'll step into the world of caped heroes, space travelers, and some truly bizarre experiments that only the 70s could have dreamed up. Want to keep going? Because the next few, they'll take you right back to your living room floor, cereal bowl in hand, heart wide open. You'd barely had time to stretch your legs or pour another bowl of cereal before the next round of color and chaos began. Saturday mornings had no commercial breaks in your heart. They were one long, shimmering reel of wonder. Super Friends. Here's where things got epic. The music alone made your pulse quicken, a brass fanfare announcing the arrival of legends. Super Friends wasn't just a cartoon. It was the moment the idea of a shared universe quietly changed kids' television forever. Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, they were all here, side by side, working as a team. You remember the Hall of Justice, that gleaming fortress rising from nowhere, a monument to good triumphing over evil. Inside, you had the voices of reason and hope, Superman's deep certainty, Wonder Woman's calm authority, Batman's clipped confidence, and then the Wonder Twins. Jaina and Zan, the goofy heart of it all, with that unforgettable chant, Wonder Twin powers, activate. One became an animal, the other water. Absurd, yes, but somehow it worked. The animation wasn't fluid, the dialogue often stiff, but it didn't matter. You weren't there for realism, you were there for faith. The faith that good could organize itself, that heroes could cooperate instead of compete. Today's superhero universes are polished, billion-dollar enterprises. But this was the seed. Back then, all you needed was imagination and a big, clunky CRT screen to believe the impossible was possible. Do you remember which super friend you pretended to be? The Jetsons reruns. By the 1970s, the Jetsons wasn't new, but that didn't stop it from feeling like a window into the future. You'd sit there, spoon in hand, marveling at George Jetson's flying car, the robotic maid Rosie, and that wild conveyor belt lifestyle. Everything was chrome, clean, and absurdly optimistic. For a generation that grew up during oil crises and inflation, the Jetsons offered comfort, a promise that someday, life would be easier. Machines would cook for you, cars would fold into briefcases, and every home would have a video phone, which, funny enough, we finally got. You can still hear George's exasperated, "Jane, stop this crazy thing," as he spun endlessly on the treadmill. It captured something deeply human, that even in the future, people would still be overworked, overwhelmed, and hilariously under control of their own inventions. Today's kids see the future as something sleek and cold, but you saw it as fun, a place with flying dogs and dinner at the press of a button. When you think about it, weren't you secretly hoping we'd all be living like the Jetsons by now? Schoolhouse Rock. And then, right between the cartoons, something unexpected appeared. Schoolhouse Rock. Snuck in learning when you least expected it. You thought it was another show, but it was an education wrapped in rhythm and color. You probably still remember the words, conjunction junction, what's your function? Those catchy tunes turned grammar, math, and history into music that stuck in your head all week. Saturday mornings didn't just entertain you, they educated you, almost by accident. The animation was minimalist, just sketches and simple colors, but the songwriting was sharp and soulful. It didn't talk down to you, it trusted kids to get it. There was a certain genius in that, teaching you about civics and multiplication tables through melody, years before standardized tests and digital apps tried to do the same. Now, kids learn from videos that disappear in 30 seconds, but you sang about the Constitution while chewing on your cereal. You learned without realizing you were learning. How many times did you hum "I'm just a bill" long before you even knew what a bill was? Land of the Lost. Then came the weird one, the one that made you lean forward because it didn't feel like a cartoon at all. Land of the Lost was live action, strange, and just a little scary. It was about a family, the Marshalls, who got trapped in a prehistoric world filled with dinosaurs, Sleestaks, and lost civilizations. The effects were primitive by today's standards, but in the 1970s they were mesmerizing. Stop-motion dinosaurs lumbered across painted sets, glowing crystals held mysterious power, and every episode balanced adventure with eerie tension. The theme song alone, that haunting, echoing tune, was enough to pull you in. It hit differently because it wasn't about fantasy heroes or slapstick. It was survival, family, and wonder. It asked big questions without spelling them out. What happens when you can't go home? How do you adapt? As a kid, you just thought it was cool. As an adult, you realize it was teaching resilience. In a way, Land of the Lost mirrored childhood itself, a confusing, unpredictable landscape where you just had to keep moving forward. You probably didn't know what Sleestack meant, but you sure knew how it felt. Do you remember that first time one appeared out of the fog? Hong Kong Phooey. Then the tone snapped right back to absurd fun. Hong Kong Phooey was every kid's martial arts fantasy wrapped in goofball comedy. Penrod Penry Pooch, the mild-mannered janitor who transformed into a crime-fighting kung fu dog, was ridiculous and absolutely irresistible. The intro song alone was a masterpiece of 70s funk. He's quicker than the human eye. You can still sing the rest, can't you? The animation had that classic Hanna-Barbera simplicity, all straight lines and bright colors, but the vibe was pure groove. It was the height of the kung fu craze. Bruce Lee was in theaters, martial arts schools were opening everywhere, and kids were mimicking kicks and chops in living rooms across America. The irony was that Phooey was terrible at martial arts. Everything he did went wrong, and somehow went right anyway. That was the magic. The show taught you that heart and confidence mattered more than perfection. You didn't have to be the best to be the hero. And maybe that's what made it unforgettable. You laughed at his clumsiness, but deep down, you admired him for trying. Didn't you ever grab a towel, wrap it around your neck, and announce yourself as the next Hong Kong Phooey? By this point, the morning sunlight was probably higher through the blinds. Maybe your parents had started moving around, the smell of coffee taking over the kitchen, but you weren't done. Not even close. Saturday morning wasn't over until the world outside forced you to turn off the TV. You'd already seen heroes and rock bands, mystery-solving dogs and pink panthers, but the next stretch, that's when things got really strange. When the 1970s started experimenting with ideas so bold, so bizarre, they could only have been dreamed up in that era. Because coming up next were shows that didn't just entertain you, they rewired your imagination. Are you ready to dive into the next round? Because the next 5, they'll remind you just how wild and fearless those Saturday mornings could get. Sigmund and the Sea Monsters. You always knew when Sid and Marty Krofft were behind a show. The colors got brighter, the puppets got weirder, and suddenly your brain was in some sugar-coated fever dream. Sigmund and the Sea Monsters was one of their wildest. Two brothers find a friendly sea monster, Sigmund, who's been kicked out of his underwater family for being too nice. Even as a kid, that story hit deeper than you realized. A creature who didn't fit in, who just wanted friends, hiding out in a human world that didn't quite understand him. Sigmund's rubbery green face with those blinking eyes and flopping lips was nightmare fuel for adults, but magic to a child's imagination. You can still remember the textures, the foam suits, the beach sand, the ocean spray that looked a little too clean under those studio lights. It was also artificial, yet it felt real because it came from an era when imagination mattered more than realism. Today's kids get CGI and perfect pixels. You got clunky, hand-built monsters that somehow had more soul. Be honest, didn't you wish Sigmund could come live in your bathtub? The Banana Splits Adventure Hour. Tra-la-la, la-la-la-la. The second those words hit, you were gone. The Banana Splits were absolute chaos. Giant, costumed animal rock stars hosting a variety show that swung between slapstick sketches, serialized adventures, and psychedelic transitions that made no sense but felt like pure joy. Fleagle, Bingo, Drooper, and Snorky. Those names still sound like a strange dream you once had, but you remember it. The bright stage, the crazy sound effects, the sense that anything could happen next. It was like someone put a Saturday morning into a blender and turned the dial all the way up. The segments jumped from cartoons to live-action serials, and somehow your brain followed it all. This was pre-internet, pre-streaming. Your mind learned to stretch for entertainment. The Banana Splits weren't smooth or logical. They were alive. They represented something we've lost, unpredictability. You didn't know what was next, but you couldn't look away. Now, everything's curated. Back then, you surrendered, and it felt amazing. Can you still hear that theme song bouncing in your head right now? Speed Buggy. There was always a show about a talking car. Before Knight Rider or Cars, there was Speed Buggy, a bright orange dune buggy with big blue eyes and a personality like your hyperactive best friend. You remember the sound he made, that sputtering, friendly stutter, beep beep. It was infectious. The plot formula was simple. A gang of teens driving across deserts, jungles, and mountains, getting caught up in mysteries and races, while Speedy saved the day. The design was classic Hanna-Barbera, recycled character models, laugh tracks, limited animation, but it had heart. You could almost feel the dust on your face, the heat waves off the sand, the wind rushing through the open frame of that buggy. It was the freedom every kid craved. the dream of the open road before you were even old enough to ride a bike. Nowadays, freedom means Wi-Fi and unlimited data. Back then, it meant a dune buggy that talked back. Be honest, did you ever name your bike after Speed Buggy? HR Pufnstuf. If Sigmund was weird, HR Pufnstuf was psychedelic. Another Sid and Marty Krofft creation, it was like falling into a candy-colored fever dream. Melancholy, Jimmy wanting to go home, the strange loneliness behind the smiles. It was a kind of storytelling that only the 1970s dared. Absurd yet emotional, handmade yet surreal. Now, with all our perfect special effects, nothing feels that dreamlike anymore. Everything's too crisp, too literal. Back then, fantasy was soft around the edges, the way memories are. Do you still remember that swirling intro sequence where colors melted into one another like sherbet in the sun? The Harlem Globetrotters animated series. Now here was a perfect blend of energy, rhythm, and heart. The Harlem Globetrotters cartoon took real-life basketball legends and turned them into animated superheroes of cool. Every episode was an explosion of sound, squeaking sneakers, bouncing balls, funky music, and that laughter that felt contagious. The characters weren't just players, they were personalities. Curly Neal, Meadowlark Lemon, and the rest turned the court into a stage. They'd save the day, outsmart villains, and always end with a trick shot that seemed to defy physics. You couldn't help but smile. It wasn't just a sports show, it was a celebration of rhythm, teamwork, and joy, kind of optimism that could only come from the 1970s. The animation style was slick and kinetic, with each bounce and spin timed to the beat of that jazzy soundtrack. Today's sports entertainment is polished, competitive, and often ruthless, but back then, fun was the game. The Globetrotters taught you that talent and laughter could coexist. That skill was nothing without soul. Did you ever grab a ball after watching and try to spin it on your finger, even though it only lasted half a second? By now, your bowl of cereal was just a swirl of milk and soggy flakes. Maybe your siblings had joined you on the carpet. Maybe the house had grown louder, but the TV was still yours, still pulling you deeper into that kaleidoscope of Saturday magic, because the 1970s still had a few surprises left. Shows that bent reality, blurred genres, and whispered to every kid, the world can be anything you dream it to be. And in the final stretch, that's exactly where we're headed, into the shows that defined imagination itself, the final five, the ones that never quite left you, even now. Captain Caveman and the Teen Angels. Now this one, you heard it before you saw it, that booming roar. Captain Caveman. It rattled the speakers and made every kid in the house laugh. Captain Caveman and the Teen Angels was a perfect collision of chaos and charm. The premise was delightfully absurd. A prehistoric superhero thawed out of ice by three mystery-solving girls who clearly borrowed a few notes from Josie and the Pussycats. Caveman wasn't exactly graceful. He was loud, hairy, and barely coherent, swinging his club and somehow saving the day through sheer dumb luck. You remember the slapstick energy, the dust clouds, the thuds, the way he'd pull impossible gadgets from his fur. Hanna-Barbera knew their formula, and they executed it like clockwork. But beneath the noise was something oddly comforting, the reminder that even the messiest hero could make a difference. Today's cartoons might have nuance and arcs, but Captain Caveman had something purer, joy through absurdity. It didn't ask for logic, it just asked you to laugh, and admit it, at least once you yelled that battle cry around the house, didn't you? The Pebbles and Bamm-Bamm Show. Every generation has that moment where the old world meets the new. For the Flintstones kids, it was the Pebbles and Bamm-Bamm Show. The babies had grown up, gone to high school, and formed a band. It was continuity before continuity was even a thing. The show had a gentler tone. Teen life in the Stone Age, complete with rock concerts, misunderstandings, and the occasional woolly mammoth cameo. The music was actually good. Pure 1970s pop polished for kids. You could almost feel the optimism in those harmonies. You probably didn't think of it then, but this show marked the first real spin-off generation moment in animation. It was proof that the world you loved could grow with you, that time could pass even in bedrock. These days, spin-offs are constant, but back then, this was new. And when that theme song kicked in, open up your heart and let the sun shine in. It felt like the 60s spirit refusing to fade. Did you ever wish your teenage life could be that simple? Just friends, songs, and rock-solid adventures. The Groovy Ghoulies. Then came something gloriously weird. The Groovy Ghoulies took classic movie monsters, Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, and turned them into a rock band. It was Halloween every Saturday, and it was funny. Each episode was a mix of puns, sketches, and musical numbers that swung between creepy and cute. The humor was all in the delivery, exaggerated, ridiculous, and often completely nonsensical. But that was the point. You remember, the voices, wild, manic, full of joy. The music had that bubblegum beat that made your foot tap without permission. And the animation, pure Filmation charm, flat, fast, and delightfully offbeat. It wasn't about fear, it was about acceptance. These monsters were just outsiders finding family through laughter and song. Looking back, it almost feels prophetic. Long before we talked about embracing differences, the Ghoulies were doing it with jokes and guitars. You can still picture that spinning haunted house, can't you? Doors flying open, bats squeaking, and somewhere inside, the band striking their first chord. The Sid and Marty Krofft Super Show. By now, Sid and Marty Krofft were practically the architects of Saturday imagination. The Super Show was their crown jewel, a variety-style hour mixing multiple miniseries: Dr. Shrinker, Wonderbug, Electro Woman, and Dinah Girl. It was a universe of oddballs and heroes, stitched together by glitter and pure 1970s confidence. It was live-action chaos, and that's what made it irresistible. You'd go from a mad scientist to a superheroine in spandex within minutes. The sets looked like someone raided a disco and a science lab at the same time. And it worked. What you remember most isn't just the content, it's the texture, the neon lights, the synthetic music, the feeling that you were being shown something that no adult in your life fully understood. And that was thrilling. Each segment carried the same underlying message: be brave, be weird, and never underestimate the power of imagination. It was the heart of 1970s kids TV, handmade, chaotic, but always sincere. When you think about it now, doesn't part of you miss that era when weirdness wasn't ironic? It was just wonderful. The New Adventures of Batman. And finally, the Caped Crusader returned to close out your Saturday. The New Adventures of Batman brought Adam West and Burt Ward back to voice their animated counterparts, which gave it that familiar warmth from the 1960s show. But with Saturday morning's brighter energy, you can still see the bold colors, deep blues, vivid yellows, and the chunky animation that made every punch look like a comic panel come to life. Robin quipped, Batman moralized, and Batmite, that impish little sidekick from another dimension, added chaos. It was camp, but it was comforting camp. In a world of Scooby snacks and cereal, Batman was the anchor, proof that justice never really took a weekend off. Its sky wasn't dark, brooding Gotham. It was sunlight, optimism, and heroism simplified for a morning crowd. Today, Batman broods in million-dollar CGI shadows, but in the 1970s, he smiled, lectured about honesty, and still managed to save the day. You didn't watch it for grit, you watched it for goodness. And that's what Saturday mornings were really about, weren't they? A little goodness before the world got serious again. When you look back now, you realize those few hours every weekend were more than cartoons. They were a cultural lullaby. Each show taught you something without ever saying it out loud: courage, curiosity, kindness, the art of laughter. You didn't know you were absorbing values, rhythms, and humor that would stick with you your whole life. You were just a kid on the floor, chin on your hands, living in a time when imagination came through the antenna. Maybe that's why, all these years later, you still feel something stir when you hear a familiar theme song, a warmth that isn't about nostalgia alone, it's about belonging. Because Saturday mornings weren't just a schedule, they were a feeling, and if you were one of the lucky ones who grew up in the 1970s, you know exactly what that feeling was. So here's your invitation. Scroll down, tell me which one you remember best, which theme song you can still hum, which moment makes you close your eyes and smile like you're 8 years old again. And maybe next Saturday, just for a little while, pour yourself a bowl of cereal, find one of those shows online, and let the magic roll back in, because the world will never make mornings like that again. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.